This is the story of Ukraine International Flight 752. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that this video is based on a factual report released by Iran. I usually don't do videos based on factual reports, as the final report usually packs a lot more aviation-related technical details. Do let me know down in the comments if you want a video when the final report does come out. Also, please be respectful in the comments down below. Ukraine International Flight 752 was a plane that was shot out of the skies of Iran on the 8th of January 2020. But to understand this crash, we have to look at the climate into which Flight 752 was lifting off that night. No, not the meteorological climate, but the geopolitical climate. It all started with an American drone strike on the 3rd of January 2020. An American airstrike in Iraq killed a high-ranking official of the Iranian military. This increased tensions between the two nations, and those tensions were not low to begin with. Iran had shot down an American drone, alleging that it had violated the airspace of Iran. The US had sanctioned Iran for its nuclear program, and in the months leading up to this incident, Iran had allegedly seized and attacked oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. With the drone strikes, the tensions reached a boiling point. Iran was displeased and angered by the actions of the United States. Iranians considered the drone strike an act of war. Iran had to respond. They had a very difficult decision to make. It could not idly stand by and let this pass. That would make the regime seem weak to its citizens, and that might be all it took for all-out protests in the streets. But contrary to rhetoric, Iran could not engage the US in a full-blown military conflict. The US could bring to bear massive amounts of firepower that the Iranian regime could not withstand. To put things in context, the Iranian Air Force had about 20 MiG-29s and 23 Su-24s. Those were their most capable jets. They did have another 119 jets, but they were obsolete planes like MiG-21s and the F-4 Phantoms. Interestingly enough, they did fly 26 F-14 Tomcats, but due to sanctions, it's unclear how effective they'd be in combat. Now compare that to the air wing of just one American supercarrier, which on average had about 64 F-18s. One American carrier, while smaller, was still comparable to the entirety of the Iranian Air Force. And we haven't even talked about the air bases nearby. So it is clear that Iran was punching way above its weight here. The regime cannot risk an all-out war, and it can also not react. With this in mind, Iran made its move. They launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles at American air bases in Iraq. The first missiles hit at 1:34 a.m., and there were 3 volleys spaced out by 15 minutes. And by 4 a.m. the attack was over, and the world held its breath. In hindsight, we can see that the attacks were designed to cause minimal damage. The strikes were designed to project an image of strength, while at the same time allowing room for the US to de-escalate tensions. No American lives were lost, and the damage was largely insignificant. A few taxiways, a few buildings, that's it. But on the morning of the 8th of January 2020, the world was on edge. No one knew what the US response would be. For all we knew, we might have just seen the opening hours of a new war in the Middle East. This is the climate that Ukraine International Flight 752 took off into, a climate of uncertainty and fear. Ukraine International Flight 752 was a flight from Tehran to Kiev, and it had 167 passengers and 9 crew members on board. As the plane was being prepped for takeoff, the country's defense network was on high alert and ready to respond to a possible counterattack in response to ballistic missile attacks. At about 12:30 a.m. UTC, the air defense networks were at their highest level of alertness. The country's military had told its civilian aviation sector that only planes that were approved and cleared by the military could take off. In short, if a plane needed to take off, it had to be approved by the military. This was a precautionary measure to avoid any civilian planes from getting caught in the crossfire. At 2:21 a.m. UTC, Ukraine International Flight 752 requested permission to start their engines. ATC forwarded that request to the Air Defense Coordination Center, who promptly approved the request. Flight 752 was now cleared by the military to operate in the skies of Iran. At 2:40 a.m., Flight 752 received its takeoff clearance and began its takeoff run. Unknown to the crew, air defense batteries around the city were actively scanning the skies for possible threats. A Tor M1, or a Gauntlet missile site, was positioned near the airport. The Tor M1 is by no means a state-of-the-art surface-to-air missile battery. It was designed in the 1970s in the Soviet Union. It was Cold War-era tech. The Gauntlet was optimized to defend against low-flying aircraft, helicopters, and some short-range ballistic threats. Sure, it was old tech, but it was more than capable of downing a low, slow passenger plane. The missile site had been moved around, presumably so that it could defend the city better in case of an attack, but a crucial mistake had been made. The missile site had not been calibrated properly. There was an issue with the way the radar site tracked airplanes. It showed an increase of 107 degrees to the heading of a plane that was being tracked. That is, if a plane were to be flying 000 degrees or north, the radar site would show the target flying 107 degrees. That's not a small margin of error, and no one knew about this error. On that night, as Flight 752 took off, the radar of the Gauntlet system did pick up the plane, but due to the error, it was presented to the operator as a target on the 250-degree azimuth with a heading of 052 degrees. What this meant was that the radar system told the operator that there was an airborne target 250 degrees relative to the missile site, and this unknown target had a heading of 052 degrees. But in reality, Flight 752 had a 143-degree azimuth as it approached the missile site, and it had a heading of 309 degrees. Just to recap, the Gauntlet system told its operator that there was a target southwest of the missile site, heading northeast, when in reality they were tracking Flight 752, which was southeast of the missile site and heading northwest. This would have alarmed the Iranians. Iran is bordered on the southwest by Doha and Kuwait. Both countries have American air bases. If the Americans were to launch a retaliatory strike, it could come in from the southwest. At 2:44 a.m. UTC, the operator of the missile site communicates details of the unknown aircraft to the coordination center. For some reason, it was not communicated successfully. Quote, "The recorded information indicates that the mentioned defense systems notification was not communicated successfully. Maybe we'll get more information on what went wrong in their chain of command in the final report." The operator begins to analyze the target and decides that it is a threat. There were no planes that were supposed to be there, and he did not know about the 107-degree error that was in the system. Having heard nothing from the coordination center, the operator decided to fire on the target, not knowing that it was a passenger plane. According to the report, the operator was not allowed to fire without explicit authorization from the coordination center, but he fired anyway. At 2:44 a.m. UTC, the first missile impacts Ukraine International Flight 752. As the first missile impacted the plane disappeared from secondary radar, but primary radar continued to track the plane. The plane began an erratic right turn. This was probably the pilot attempting to return to the airport. The Gauntlet system still had a lock on Flight 752, and at 2:45 a.m. another missile was launched. The Gauntlet system lost its connection with the second missile as the second missile was on its way to the plane. At 2:46 a.m. the plane was airborne, but it was on fire. The plane tried to make a right turn, but the intensifying fire probably made that very hard. Flight 752 came down in a playground on the outskirts of Tehran. No one survived the crash. This crash reminds me so much of MH17, not because both were downed, but because both accidents involved innocent people who were caught in the crossfire. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. A big thank you to Gusto for letting me use his amazing footage on my videos. I'll catch you guys next time. Stay safe.